Okay, welcome back, everyone. This is session 5 of LCAN 101. What a journey we've been on. I'm Kim Krupa with the Florida College Access Network. I'm Director of Network Engagement and Communications. I wanted to start this session because it's a pretty important one, but it's also different. So, sort of an acknowledgement that we've been in this series long enough. Some of you have been with us from the beginning. Some of you are just joining now and catching up. That's okay. They're designed to come one, come all. Just join where you can, and you can backfill later. But some of you have been able to work on some real projects since we started. You've all definitely been looking at what is this thing called collective impact? How does it actually function? A lot of you are holding up the mirror and looking at your partnerships, honestly, how your network infrastructure it has been set up. Does that still work for us? Some of you are even looking at your data and playing around with some of those fun data visualization tools we shared in our storytelling session last year. In January, talking about sustainability and leadership turnovers and transitions and all that amazing stuff, sustainability in uncertain times. And that foundation matters, and what we're doing today definitely builds on all of that. Here's Braulio Colon, Executive Director of FCAN, entering the room. Y'all make sure you say hi. But as I was putting this together today, it does feel a little bit different from the previous 4 sessions. And it felt like, okay, this isn't a session where we're going to add another skill or, another framework to the toolkit in box, which is getting pretty deep. We're kind of zooming out a little bit and going to look at your network as a whole and maybe ask a question most LCANs don't ever have time to ask, which is, does your network, does its design, its composition, its shape actually match the problem you're trying to solve? And it's a hard question, right? And maybe even harder than it sounds when you start thinking about it. And the research we'll look at today has some uncomfortable things to say about how most networks form. And then for us, what that costs students as entities that put students at the center. Okay, so your fair warning there as we get started. Here's what we're going to be covering today. 5 things, and they build on each other. We're going to do a network health check. You might remember session 2. If you haven't gotten to session 2 yet, this will ring a bell when you do. It was about individual partnerships and relationship building. That partnerships move at the speed of trust. Today is about your network as a whole, its shape, its structure, its vulnerabilities. And then from there, we're going to look at what the research has to say on social capital and economic mobility. What does that say about how your network is designed, and why does that matter for students that you're trying to serve? And we're going to look at some of Raj Chetty's work here and kind of reframing the whole conversation about who belongs at your tables. Then we're going to use a new tool. It's called the Post-Secondary Completion Playbook. And it's really a mapping tool that covers 5 different domains that LCANs tackle in their networks. You don't have to tackle all 5, but these are the 5 kind of spaces that LCANs occupy within this post-secondary ecosystem. So we're going to walk through those, look at some examples of what that looks like in action, and then bring up some questions and interesting directions you might want to go in based on this mapping tool. We'll close with a structured reflection. So be thinking about, how do you absorb this into your work? What is the next action you might want to share or be willing to take grounded in what you just learned? So all of session 5 builds on sessions 1 through 4, but also will cascade through the end of LCAN 101. So I'm thinking it's like really a pivot point in the series that we'll come back to, and we'll come back to that at the end. We go through what's coming up next in 101. So before we get into the content, I actually changed my icon for today. I thought that was pretty cute, little coffee cup. Let's start with a really hard question. Are you building a network or a list of Partner names. And I know this is a really crummy question to ask you at the end of a Thursday. It feels a little provocative and it's meant to be. Um, there's a difference, and the research is pretty clear about what that difference produces for students. So, a list of names is coordination at best. And all LCANs have to start somewhere. And you got to start with your Excel spreadsheet. Um, a network is moving toward our partners know each other, they work together when I'm not in the room, and they feel accountable to shared outcomes. Like we all have a stake in this and we feel personally invested, organizationally invested. That's getting us closer to that systems change space that we want to occupy. So, the sub questions, um, do your partners know what each other does? Do they work together when you're not in the room? Would your students notice if half of them stop showing up? Meaning, is the work you're doing together valuable and visible? And are you the only thing connecting them to each other? And you don't have to have good answers here because that's why we're here. So take a minute, and you seem to be on mute, or go ahead and pop it into the chat. I really didn't mean that to sound snarky. And now that I'm looking at it, it looks a little snarky.
I just
Yeah,
put
so what is
names
in
in the
between a list of names? Yes, we're going to actually look at that.
chat. Yeah, I think that's where I feel like we are, and it's very different too because the two kind of areas that I'm working with in our Future Ready Collier is early learning and college and career. And I feel like the early learning piece, people have worked together longer. So it's a lot further along than I feel like, we are in the college and career space. So it's definitely more than a list of names. People are working together. It's that shared outcomes, like getting everyone to kind of let go a little bit of like individually what it is and like how do we adopt some community wide metrics and strategies.
Yeah, I love that. It's so common. And it's also so interesting to me. I think it's just because the little kids are so cute. They're like our little puppies, and we all want to be doing things for them. But
Yeah.
then it's also the hardest space to be in is birth to five. The systems are so fragmented. It's a huge amount of time. There's no system or resource really that you can leverage beyond increasing taxes. Like it's the hardest space, but also the one that seems to be most attractive.
Yeah,
Also,
I
the
think
biggest
our
ROI.
area, in our area, we're fortunate enough to have that financial help. And so I think that has actually pushed people together earlier, right? When you have major funders in town saying, hey, if you work together, you're going to get funded higher, then you start to work together pretty quickly. And that hasn't necessarily been the case in the college and career space, and right, you're
Hmm.
aiming to get kids ready for kindergarten. In the college and career space, you have post-secondary and that wide range of what that is, and you have career and military, and so it's so many moving parts that you're aiming towards. It's not as succinct as like, let's get kids ready for when they enter school.
Yeah, good point. Seeing some head nods. You definitely in a shared pain right there. Well, hopefully this will be a lot of like sense making for you as you think about activating the career side because there is so much untapped potential and work to be done that can also be really exciting to economic powerhouses. People are excited about kindergarten and the workforce space, but it also is over a decade away. So this work can be very exciting because it's so immediate and tangible and measurable. So that is my goal is to get everyone as excited as I am by the end of today and not exhaust you all. Um, anyone
Um,
else?
yeah, so we had our my first LCAN meeting yesterday, and
Let's
yeah,
say first in a long time.
My first.
First in a long
No,
time.
yeah,
You're
my
first.
first.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's all. Yeah. But yeah, and yeah, there was a big long list of names that I sent the email invite to, but not nearly as many came. And I'm trying to find out who's kind of dropped off and but the people that were at the table were engaged. And I learned so much about the age range that you're talking about exactly, the amount of opportunities and the money that's out there for these training programs or for maybe your non-traditional students. And so I'm looking forward to next week. I have a couple of meetings that I'm going to go and learn more about those opportunities. So, but I
Awesome.
agree what you're saying, Megan. The KCAN when they met, definitely a much bigger group, and they seem to be kind of running themselves almost, but in many different directions.
Right. That could be a double-edged sword. They run
Exactly.
themselves. All right. So one partnership, great. That's how we all start versus a whole network. So we'll look at the difference a little bit. And the research on these, whatever you want to call us, our place-based collaboratives, our collective impacts, it really shows that networks form around convenience and existing relationships rather than around the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So, Sarah, Megan, someone gave you a list. Maybe you made it from scratch. You also invite who you know. The people on that list will invite who they know. And then 3 years later, you've got a really cozy, comfortable table. Um, but it may or may not reflect the community that you're serving or trying to serve. And so, network science, which I'm obsessed with, and if I was to redo my major over, I probably would do something along those lines because it gives us so many useful ways to see this. And so, I have a little graphic here I pulled up from my son's engineering book. And we all know this, what centralized networks look like. Everything flows through a single hub, very command and control. If that hub weakens, you throw the volleyball at that thing, the network will weaken with it. And distributed networks on the other side really hold. I love that spider web shape. Partners are kind of connected to each other, but not like just through you, Megan McCarthy, through you, Sarah Katie, holding the whole thing together. And the work continues even when leadership changes and when funding shifts and all those things we talked about last month. So this is where your LCAN should be headed, is more of this distributed leadership model. I have my little button there. And that's kind of one of our first diagnostic questions with this session is like not how many partners you have, but how are they connected to each other? So a little bit of grounding material right here. A second point I wanted to make before we get into the 5 domains is that a network is not a meeting. Most LCANs are conveners, and that's where they start. The ones that move outcomes are connectors. And I was thinking, Megan, now that we're on this slide, I don't have an in between column. I need to do an in between column. I'm going to fix this. But for right now, you're stuck with what I already did. So, looking at the left column, um, it's recognizable. It may even be where you are now and where you may be for the foreseeable future. That's definitely not a judgment. It's just a starting point. You're bringing people to the table. You're owning an agenda, all that good stuff we covered in session one. You're becoming a communication hub, like the knowledge and data center on this work for your community, just by virtue of waking up every day and thinking about it. Partners are showing up for you, Sarah. That's a great thing to measure. Are they going to come next time? And if you go away, the network goes away. That's the typical thing we find in convener roles. The right column is the direction to be heading in and definitely thinking about. And so it's partners showing up for each other, communications flowing without you in the middle. It's holding even when you're not in the room, even. And so the rest of today is really about how to get our LCANs from conveners to connectors, and then addressing that so what question. What does it matter who's at my table? Oops, just admitted someone. As long as I'm doing good work. And so let's look at some research to explain why this distinction matters so much for the students that we serve. I always love throwing out good questions, even if you don't ask them out loud, because I know they're probably in your head. So we're going to look at some of the opportunity insights research and the work that Raj Chetty's team has been doing. Just as a refresher, the opportunity insights body of work kicked off a few years ago and kind of set the world on fire. They used data from 72 million Facebook users, and they were able to map social networks across income levels and zip codes. And they asked a simple question, deceptively simple. Do poor kids have relationships with people who aren't poor? Anyone want to venture to guess what the answer mostly is? Mostly, the answer is no.
Exactly.
You can go into the map, you can type in Escambia County, Collier County, Hillsborough County, Lee County, and you can see geographically what that looks like for kids in different zip codes in your county. And it's a wonderful, wonderful tool, especially if you have a data team that will geek out and stuff like this. But the answer is mostly no, anywhere you go in the country. It's going to look really, really bad. And so that absence of what he calls cross-class connection is one of the strongest predictors of whether a low-income young person moves up the economic ladder. So the answer to this question is the number one predictor. So to answer that so what more directly for LCANs, I think it matters in a really concrete way for us. Because the students we're trying to serve are those who are disproportionately from low-income families. They're first generation, like many of us who are passionate about this work, myself included. They're from social networks that are really tight within their income groups, but not across them. They tend to have strong, what they call bonding social capital. So deep ties within the community, with the faith community, with the community pillars, but limited bridging social capital. The relationships that can connect students to, the halls of power, the information and people with the power to open doors. And so that is what college does in our country. And here is the quote directly. So the way I said it is not as academic, but you'll have access to all these slides if you need any help making the case to your own communities. And so in terms of why local college access and LCANs as these bridging institutions, Joy's joining us from Uplift Ed. There we go. That is answering that so what question. Why do we need to think about our LCAN partnership and our network health and how we're designing our collaborative? Well, because who else is thinking about this? And so to answer that so what question, we really look at the density and diversity of your network. I wouldn't say it determines, but it has direct consequences for students to access that social capital, who gets access, who doesn't. So who gets access to the employers, the mentors, the advisors, the professionals, the community leaders, the potential sources of opportunity for students who wouldn't otherwise have access to those relationships. So Chetty's research really adds something to what we saw in the difference between being a convener and a connector. And that is great. You have a meeting where you've got your CEO sitting next to your student. The CEO gave a scholarship, the student received it. Wonderful. But he says it's not enough to have high and low income people like just sitting in the same room and at the same table. You have to actually form a relationship between them. So proximity does not automatically produce connection. It's like, great. Can our work be any harder? Because think about what that means for your LCAN. You can convene till your heart, till the cows come home, right? You can bring everyone together. We do this all the time. We could put them at the same table, having the same conversation. But if you stop there, if you just bring people together and hope, the research says it doesn't work. And so that's the difference between the convener and the connector. And LCANs are bridges. So we're not talking about hosting a meeting. We're talking about active, deliberate work of building connections that would not otherwise exist. And it's a little bit of a different job description between being a convener and a connector. So let's talk about what that looks like in different levels. Here is where I do have a middle one, now that I'm thinking about it. How do you get to do that deeper work that is also producing outcomes? So let's take a look at these 3 different levels as we kind of go deeper into network cohesion, I would say. So coordination, if you just put your eyeballs on that top line, this is where most LCANs start and spend their time. What we looked at earlier with partners showing up to our meetings, they're blasting what we blast, they're sharing what they're doing. We're coordinating, we're aligning, we're not stepping on each other's toes, we're efficient. And that matters. That's not nothing. But as we all know, we're going to get the census data in 3 years. Is that going to move the needle on a census outcome by coordinating? No. And who is going to support your LCAN if you're not showing something meaningful is changing? So not a lot of people are going to fund coordination. And so it's great to do it. It's not sexy. You need to do more, better. Cooperation gets us a little closer. So this is where partners maybe start adjusting what they do based on some results. An advisor might change how they communicate with students based on a partner sharing data about where students get confused, let's say in the FAFSA application. It produces better reach. More students are getting touched by the work. But when we're talking about things that stick, population level change, we're really talking about a different kind of network. What do you see in a graduation rate and a FAFSA completion rate? An opportunity youth decline, right? We want more of our students in school and employed. That requires collaboration or collective action, if we're using the jargon of our field. So it's, sharing resources, yes, but also risk. And partners are holding themselves accountable jointly for the outcomes they couldn't produce by themselves. So it's a pretty obvious chart. I think you all would agree. And then I think the hard question here would be how many of us are operating at the coordination level? How often do we get to do the deeper collaborative work, the messy work, but the meaningful work? And who are the partners who are sharing risk with you? I think for most LCANs, they can name a few, 2 or 3 maybe at most. And that's where that gap between being a comfortable network and being a powerful network becomes more visible. And so I really hope at the end of today, we can think about what that means for you locally and regionally, building a network where more of your partnerships are operating at that 3rd level where population level change happens. So we're not going to do any like formal research instruments today, but I did pull a couple questions for you to just kind of digest and sit with. And then, of course, you're going to get these slides and have a chance to maybe bring these back to your teams later. So the first 2 questions get at depth How many of your current partners could name your North Star right now? If your partners can't name your shared priority outcome, that tells you something about whether you're operating at coordination or collaboration. How many of your partners have changed something about how they work because of their involvement in your LCAN? If nothing has changed, then that's information too. That's a signal. The third question is a connector convener test question we introduced in slide 5. That sounded weird, test question. But if you stopped convening tomorrow, how many of your partners would continue working together? I think it's worth sitting with, because if many LCAN, the answer is very few would continue working together. That's why I exist, right? Without this backbone holding the center, why would they be meeting? So, and again, not a failure, but more of a starting point. How can we be more effective and more resilient? Maybe we haven't tapped into the right people yet. The fourth question is most directly connected to Chetty's research and to students furthest from opportunity. So, which populations of students are least represented in the work your current partners do? So, are your partners serving the students in the populations that you're trying to lift up? So, this is a really hard question for us, because we often attract the folks who have the time, the means, the resources. But if our partners predominantly work with students who are already going to college, who are already connected, already supported, then our network may be well intentioned, but it's not structured to move population level change. So, for first gen, low income students. So, an important question here for network health. And the next one I really love. I mean, we're putting so much on our poor LCAN leaders, right? If you want to move mountains, look at all the things you have to do. But look at all the wonderful people supporting you too as we build this family together. And this is one of those hard questions. When did you last add a partner who was genuinely new to your network, not just new to your table? We see networks tend to calcify when they stop growing and adding new people. It's the same voices every month, same perspectives, and I would add the same blind spots. And so meaningful network growth here, though, is not just like adding new people. It's really thinking about adding relationships that bring your LCAN closer to students and closer to communities that you're trying to center. And so let's get into this outcomes playbook. It was just published, actually, at the end of 2025, but it's based on this education to workforce tool that the Gates Foundation published, I want to say in 2022 or 2023. That is a really wonderful tool that you'll get in the show notes. It's also a website, educationtoworkforce.org. But this outcomes playbook is really a summary of hundreds and hundreds of research studies on what actually moves post-secondary outcomes at the community level. That's LCANs, right? They're like, oh, that sounds like us. And it organizes it helpfully into 5 domains. So this is digestible. Each domain represents a category of conditions that research shows must be present in a community for students to get to and through college, emphasizing like huge circle around students who are first gen, low income, students who are navigating multiple barriers simultaneously. So always centering the students who are furthest from opportunity. And I really love this framework, obviously, because that's what I am showing you today. But it turns on so many bells, I think, as we're looking at which space do we want to occupy? What does our community need from us? And it really makes visible what the heck is the purpose of an LCAN. What needs to be true outside the classroom for a student to succeed? Outside the advisor's office, outside the financial aid office. And how can we be that bridge builder through our really strong, awesome network? So, as I show you these, I want you to know, though, that you don't have to do all 5. You're not trying to solve all of these problems with your little $100,000 budget and your beautiful brain, okay? Your job is to make sure that someone in your network is solving these problems and that they're doing it with support and resources and responsibility. That they are like domain owners and that these people are connected to each other in your community and to students in a way that actually functions as a system. So you're building that community infrastructure. You're not owning everything. And I just always keep that spider web image in the back of your head because it's so tempting to be hub and spoke. So we're going to go through each of these and think about who in my community is responsible for this, and are they at my LCAN table? So we're going to kind of do this in a fun way. Fun for a virtual Zoom call. It'd be way more fun in person, but we'll try our best. So we're going to look at each domain, start with a statistic. We love being data centered. And then we'll kind of answer a couple questions about the domain and then surface some examples of what this could look like in action. And so the stat I pulled for this one is pretty glaring. I actually am looking at Jennifer Libby on my screen, thinking of complete Tampa Bay. So 43 million Americans right now started college and didn't finish. And many of them have debt, I would add. So they don't have the credential. In the research, which it can be so ugly, they call it some college no credential, SCNC. Sarah, do not write that one down. It's a terrible acronym. But anyway, they're tracked by the National Student Clearinghouse nationally. And most of us have no idea how many of them live in our zip codes and in our counties. And FCAN can get you that data. Just shoot me a message and we can get that to you. But this is the completion gap. And along with access, these are the twin, defining challenges of our time, are access and completion. And I think what makes this domain so important for LCANs specifically is that no one really owns this population. We're all sort of structured not to address these in-between spaces between college and high school and community and workforce. None of our systems are set up to tackle these students. The moment a student stops out, they just disappear, right? So who's tracking them? In most communities, nobody. And that's a network gap with huge human consequences. And so post-secondary completion systems being a space that LCANs can comfortably occupy, where we have a role to play, no single institution plays this role, you can really see where you fit. And if this is something that kind of sings with the people in your community who want to address college access issues, maybe this is a big gap that you can kind of hang your hat on. What happened to the students who left? What would it take to bring them back? And I'm looking at some of the really cool research on this, and I have one of the sources cited on this page. I actually had an old source, and I went digging around to prepare for today, and I found a brand new one. This is an amazing source, this Trellis report that I'll put in our folder. But basically, they look at 58 institutions in 13 states, and they tell you how to re-engage stopouts. And it's all outside institutions. It's all stuff community intermediaries can do. And what they find is yes, you can reach these students. The resources exist. What's missing is a network to really care about this issue and then to see across systems what can be done. And basically, if you're just going to write a headline about this paper, it's that if you can capture a student who stopped out within 2 years, you have like a 90% chance of getting them to completion. And so that is something to really take back home and sit with and maybe even consider in domain one. I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything about
I mean,
domain one.
we're doing this with Complete Tampa Bay. Our program's been around about 5 years now, so it's very dependent also on the colleges that we work with, though, to make sure that we have those wraparound services and that really soft handoff of that person who's returning. And so, we're always constantly working on that system there. SCF is an amazing partner that we added on a couple of years ago. And they had great results because I think we have all the systems in place, and it's really been amazing. And so we're trying to replicate that at our other two colleges as well. So, but yeah, if anybody has questions on this type of programming, we definitely have been doing this. So,
And are you doing Complete Tampa Bay at the summit?
are not this year? No, we
Not
have
this
another
year.
proposal.
Okay.
Last year, that's what we
Last
highlighted.
year.
Mhm.
Yes. You could even maybe share your slides with us.
Yeah,
Or I
we
don't
have
think you
that
did it.
with Planet too. Planet and us.
Planet. You and Planet. It was Sarasota and Leap.
Yep.
Yeah. So Complete Tampa Bay is including Sarasota, which you consider part of Complete Tampa Bay, right?
Right. We have a contract with them,
Yeah.
and the Gulf Coast helps fund
It's
it.
a really great, right in our state example of an LCAN doing this work at a pretty large scale.
Yeah, we've had some great results the last year, especially with some of our partners. So, but you're right. It's better with them. The farther out, the harder it is to kind of get them to come back. So I can see the success rates within 2 years is,
Yeah.
much higher. So
Much higher. And we don't want to eat the entire elephant. So, working on what they call the potential completers seems to be a space where LCANs might actually see some success rather than trying to address all of the 43 million Americans. All right. So, basic needs and wraparound supports brings joy to my heart. As a former food banker, we really can't do anything without addressing basic needs. Full stop. And the headline here is 6 in 10 students experience some sort of basic needs hardship on their path to completion. 6 in 10, which is the statistic at the top. So this work matters, but how many of our food banks and public housing institutions and homelessness people are talking to our college advisors and making that connection? We just had an emergency aid summit earlier this month, and I can tell you not many. This is the perfect LCAN space because a lot of this is like a network failure. Our programs aren't failing, they're usually rock and rolling. Institutions are doing their best with the limited resources they have, not nearly able to make the need happen. And so it's a really great problem and a very fundable problem for LCANs to own and sit with. Organizations doing the work of serving students aren't in conversation with higher education institutions. They don't think of themselves as college access partners. And they've likely never been invited to your LCAN. Correct me if I'm wrong. Some of them see your students every day. And I saw that when I started working in food banking. Oh my gosh, how many college students? I mean, this was 15 years ago before we really had food pantries on campus. They see your students, they see their families, they just don't know they're your students. And so the research on intervening here as a network is very powerful on the kinds of outcomes you can get when you meet the basic needs of students that I can share with you. I think I have a report uploaded in the folder. So you're not providing the food, you're not running the housing program. all of you beautiful people, you're going to make sure organizations are doing the work in your network and that your network functions as a system to serve these students before they disappear, right? So you're like sort of like chief navigator, making sure everyone's doing their job well and talking to each other across these different domains. I wish I had more time to spend on each of these. But this companion report is like 250 pages, and it goes into each domain in really great depth with examples and data and outcomes that you can start taking a look at. But in the interest of time, because of course I'm running out of time, we'll talk about domain 3, workforce and career pathways. And our statistic here is about jobs. How many of them do not come from an Indeed application? So if this is true, if hiring is a trust transaction, that people hire people they know or people who are known by people they trust, then what does that mean for our students who have no social capital, right? They're screwed. And so having LCANs really hold this role has been so like mountain shaking for, I think, the field to really go after this workforce and career pathways domain. Using the Chetty research, which has kind of given us this open door to go after owning this issue that hasn't traditionally been a college access issue. The fact that two students can graduate with the same credential from the same institution and have radically different outcomes based entirely on who they know is a problem. So the credential is necessary and it is not sufficient for so many of our students. So being like the opportunity people is a fantastic role for an LCAN network to play. And we have some examples here of what it means to nurture and improve and cultivate a network within all these different pathways. Megan, to your point, all the choices that can be made. What do the networks look like in your counties? And how do you build stronger networks? So here we're sort of learning to be pathway agnostic, right? But student centered and student first, and just giving students the best opportunities within that pathway. And every pathway is so different, and each is complex, and how many are talking to each other? And how many of them are at your tables right now? So again, building that bridge between the credential and the opportunity is what this domain is all about. Okay. Again, bringing LCAN work to life, domain 4, social capital and mentoring. And here's our not so fun fact. 10 to 20% of college intending high school graduates never make it in the fall, AKA summer melt. Another not fun fact, peer and near peer mentors increase four-year college enrollment. Oh, no, this is a fun fact. But even more for students furthest from opportunity who face multiple barriers. So students are accepted. We did the work. They filled out their FAFSA. They were accepted. They submitted a deposit. They went through that crazy navigation thing. They got vaccinated, right? And then they didn't show up. And so this paper down here that I had to put in tiny little font is also brand new that I'll put in box for you. But it just shows you that what can you do about it? And what are the areas you can work on to kind of solve for some of these problems of summer melt? Once you get a handle on what that data is locally from your Florida college system partner, who will give it to you because they want to solve this problem, you can say, hey, how many of the high schoolers from X high school who enrolled, accepted, paid the deposit, ready to show up, you're preparing for them to show up, never showed up. And they're going to say between 30 and 55% of them never made it to campus. And you're going to say, oh, well, I've got these 4 different interventions that I can start working on based on this Brookings report. Let's form a working team to figure out what we can do about it, right? And you kind of get that conversation going based on this gap and this data, and also what's possible. And a lot of it comes down to a caring adult and bringing together all the people who love on these students. And so, how many of these groups are at our LCAN tables? And nobody is connecting them. I can guarantee, if not for you, there's nobody doing this. And it is like the number one thing you could do. It's the same thing that we see in like trauma informed care, like the power of one caring adult to change the life of a child. It's the same thing here, right? Just different stakes. Good grief. Can't believe how quickly that went. So I think I teased to unusual suspects coming to your LCAN tables. Hopefully you're able to see a few of them. Not anything, it's kind of like a Captain Obvious. Like it's not anything completely revolutionary, but maybe it's a little bit of a, oh, okay, I can see where that would fit if I go in this direction. And maybe I can go get some data and see what this problem looks like. And what did it look like 10 years ago? Is it getting better or worse? Is it spotty? And there are certain students who are being completely left behind. So those are all things that FCAN is here to support you with, and our amazing research team. And a lot of this, as you're getting to see, is not about building programs, but making those connections possible. The last domain, 5, we've already talked about a little bit, about where a child grows up matters, unfortunately, is a great predictor. When the Florida Chamber came out with their gap map and their zip code project 8 years ago and have been expanding on it every year, it gets better. A lot of that supports this Raj Chetty work where you can go in and kind of map your county across all different outcome areas with really sobering findings. Families living half a mile away from each other, having dramatically different outcomes. And it's not because of anything that child did, it's because of where they grew up. And so you're not supposed to be like fixing neighborhoods, LCAN leader. You're like, what the heck is this domain? You're not supposed to be building affordable housing. I know some of you want to. Or even maybe like paying for a bus route. Remember a few years ago, one of our LCANs tried to go after some transportation funds to build a bus route to their college. You're not necessarily supposed to be solving these problems directly or pretend that you can. But I think what LCANs can do that nobody else can do is like connecting the data about where the neighborhood conditions, what is that doing to student outcomes? And hanging that over the heads of the people who have power to do things in this situation, being present in the room where it happens. And so I have a list here of all the people who own these issues in our communities. Are they seeing college persistence data disaggregated by neighborhood, right? In the beginning, session 1, where we talked about publishing and putting your data out there and producing reports, this would be a great chance to deliver that report at a city council meeting. Stealing 5 minutes from an agenda and doing the state of college access in my county. Transit agency directors making route decisions. They're not seeing data about how many students miss class because they stop the buses at 5 p.m., etc. So I think of our LCANs as like sitting at this intersection here. You've got access to all this education data. Many of us get up every day and live and breathe this data. How do we get it in the hands of the people who make these decisions? We know the squeaky wheels get the grease. Let's be those squeaky wheels, right? And let's use all this information at our fingertips to really be influencers in our regions. And that's really what domain 5 is. I love it so much because it activates root causes. And all of a sudden, like a light bulb goes off for me where I'm like, oh man, everyone matters. And students are in our towns accessing all these places. How can I better connect them? Do I know who the people are? Have I ever met the people who manage and run these agencies? So it's not necessarily inviting them to your meeting, but really getting to know how it works and how things operate inside these places that have tremendous potential to affect student outcomes. Okay. That was a lot. How are you all feeling right now? This is sort of the last slide for the domains. I see some nodding heads. I think maybe you breathed a sigh of relief when I said you're not asking the city council member to come to your LCAN meeting. Really figuring out what you need from these like community power brokers, in creating a presence through publishing by doing the work and becoming the college access and success expert. Obviously, it comes over time. This is a 101 where we're planting seeds and maybe building your capacity, your confidence in yourselves. I believe in you. I know you can do it. We are here to support you. You can take every one of these bullets, and I probably have a whole Bible I could throw at you, of what could work in some of these spaces. But helping people who have power make better decisions that affect student outcomes is really what's at the heart of this one. So, systems change, domain 5, the most important thing and the hardest thing. That's why many LCANs might choose 2 domains. We want to keep our eye on domain 5 and work on this, but maybe do something a little more near term, like summer melt, that's solvable, that we can gain some traction on. So we've covered a lot of ground today. As we wrap up from, let's see, we started with that one partnership to the spider web. We looked at the research on social capital, what networking means at different levels and continuums and depths. We looked at 5 domains from a 250-page research report. I'm pretty proud of us. You all stuck with me. Thank you. I just have a couple last questions for you to think about. This is just asking for you to be honest about where your network maybe is weakest within the 5 domains relative to what students in your community need, and maybe you don't know. And if it's like, well, I need to know my data more, then let's have a conversation about that and we can help you with that. That is a little bit of an FCAN specialty. The second one asks you to name a specific organization, like an actual one in your community within that domain, who belongs in your network but isn't quite there yet. The last one is the one most of us skip, which also means it's the most important. Because before you reach out to that organization, you need to know what they gain from the relationship. We talked a lot about that in session 2. partners disengage, they ghost us when they don't see a value in being there. And the research shows that the collaboratives that survive these ups and downs of partnerships are able to say, this is what's in it for us both, for you and me. And so the playbook is really a great tool to extend these like very brief 60 minutes we had together today beyond our time together. It has indicators to track, evidence-based practices to experiment with, conversations, onboarding, making the case to a skeptical stakeholder about why their organization belongs in your network, all kinds of stuff. So I'll make sure that that is parked and uploaded. There's also a 2-page cheat sheet that goes with the huge book that is uploaded in the folder as well. So again, today was the pivot. I kind of told you guys this one felt a little bit meta, not necessarily learning a new thing, but conceptualizing our work and where it fits into our communities and building that systems architecture. So we're going to pull that thread for the next section on 6, 7, and 8. This one, you can't use technology to amplify a network that doesn't exist. I love this one so much. I'm going to give you guys my tools of the trade and just kind of open it all up. How do you run a really complex network and basically survive the next day? How do you not run yourself into a rat hole that's used technology to connect and amplify? Diversifying your funding, engaging partners you haven't identified yet, and planning for population level impact, getting to that deep level. We're going to work through a theory of change in our last closing session on session 8. So today was all about that mapping work, and the next 3 sessions are making it operational for you. So that is our session for today. Thank you all so much. As always, I'm going to hang on the call for anyone who wants to chat or debrief post-recording. I'm happy to talk about anything we covered today. But thank you all so much for joining.